Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sake Revolution. This is America's first sake podcast, and I am your host, John Puma from the Sake Notes. I'm also the guy who started the Internet Sake Discord, and I'm also the lead mod over at Reddit's r/sake community.
And I'm your host, Timothy Sullivan. I'm a sake samurai, I'm a sake educator, as well as the founder of the Urban Sake website. And every week, John and I will be here tasting and chatting about all things sake, doing our best to make it fun and easy to understand. Hello.
Welcome, Tim. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, welcome back to the studio.
This is the Zoom studio.
Yes, it's nice to be recording again, and I'm looking forward to some super yummy sake today.
Well, you are in luck because we do have some very yummy sake today. And so today we're going back into one of our series, one of our fun series. And which series is this, Tim?
We're going to be dipping our toe back into the branded series where we focus on one particular well-known or interesting brand of sake and talk about what they're all about.
What I find interesting is that typically when we do these branded episodes, they often end up being these brand new brands or sometimes brand new breweries. And that's not the case today. Today, we've got a brand and a brewery that's been around for a long time, but has recently gone through a little bit of a shift. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, like a reboot, redesign.
A reboot. That makes sense. So why don't you tell the folks at home what we're doing?
Yeah, let's get into it. We're going to be talking about the brand Masumi today. Now, before we get into all the details and history and all the stories, what do you know about Masumi off the top of your head? Because it is a well-known brand that has been out there. So what do you know about Masumi?
So things I know about Masumi. Number one, they are located in Nagano. They are right by Lake Suwa. Mm-hmm. I know that the family name is Miyasaka. Mm-hmm. And I know that they discovered yeast number 7.
All right.
Is that right?
That's good. Yes, you got it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so
I wasn't sure if it was like discovered or they cultivated or what. I know that I associate Masumi and yeast number 7.
Yes. Very good. Yeah, that's the cliff notes of the episode. So if you're pressed for time, you can just stop here. And John filled you in on the highlights of Masumi.
Well, that's just just the cliff notes. You really should always read the full book.
Oh, absolutely. So the brewery name that makes the Masumi brand is Miyasaka Jozo. So as you said, Miyasaka is the family name. And this brewery was founded in 1662, if you can believe it.
That's even old by like sake brewery standards, like 1662. Oh my goodness!
I don't know. I don't know the full story, but apparently they started out as sword makers, and then there was some like Middle Ages warring period in Japan, and they decided to put down the sword and pick up the sake and became sake makers. And so the family business started out sword making, then it switched to sake brewing, and there have been many generations of Miyasakas until we get to the current president. And I thought it might be interesting to talk about the word Masumi and why they chose that as their brand name and where does that come from.
All right.
So you mentioned that the brewery Miyasaka Jozo is on Lake Suwa in Nagano Prefecture. Mm-hmm. And there is a shrine there in Suwa. And the shrine has an ancient treasure, which they keep and revere. And it's actually an ancient bronze mirror. So it's a piece of bronze that was polished eons ago to a mirror-like finish. And this ancient treasure is kept in the shrine and venerated there. And they decided to name their sake Masumi, which translates to transparency or truth. So it's a reference to this mirror, which is revered at their local shrine. Very Japanese, right?
Yes, quite. But, that's really cool, actually. Yeah, that's nice. I like that. It's got a local story associated with it. I think that's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
And one of their sakes is Mirror of Truth. You may have had that in the past. It's not what we're tasting today, spoiler alert,
Right.
but one of their Masumi sakes is called Mirror of Truth, and that refers to the name Masumi and this bronze mirror that's the local treasure at the shrine.
Yeah. And I am familiar with the Mirror of Truth. That's really cool. Now we mentioned in the Cliff Notes that they've also gotten they have a little bit of history associated with that brewery with this yeast and and probably some other stuff. When you're around since 1662, things happen around you sometimes, I think. So what are some of the highlights here?
Yeah, well, the yeast number 7 is by and large the number one thing that Masumi is famous for. And they had a little bit of a dark period in the early part of the 20th century where, they weren't doing well, and the ancestors of the current president went around Japan and studied how to make sake. And then in the mid-1940s, they started winning gold medals all of a sudden at the national sake competitions. 1943 was the first time they took the first place in the national sake competition. And then they did it again the next year. So in 1946, Shoichi Yamada, the scientist from the National Brewing Institute, went to Nagano, and want to examine what was making their sake so good. And they isolated number 7 yeast for the first time. And
wait a minute. So let me get this straight. I'm going to repeat some of this because I just want to make sure I have this 100%. So they were winning competitions, and everyone was like, wait a minute, why are these guys so good?
Yes.
And so they sent somebody over to study it, and we're like, oh wait, they discovered a new yeast by accident?
Kind of. I think that's it. Yes.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, they weren't fishing for a new yeast, but my understanding is that this kind of, yeast is a living thing, and it morphs and modifies, and they basically could isolate off the foam of these batches that were coming out so delicious that this yeast was something new. And it is recorded as being born in this brewery. So in the show notes, I'm actually going to put a picture of the plaque that is on the wall of the Moromi room at the Suwa Brewery, where it is recognized that number 7 yeast was born. So
that is a really fun story. I have to say, I really like that. I love the idea that happens that way. I think these days it's probably a lot more done in my mind. I feel like it's done in the lab, right? They're trying to cultivate it, trying to do something a certain way. I like the idea that this was something that was more or less ambient to them. And they were like, wait a minute, we're on to something. Or other people were like, why is this so good? These guys are up to something. We have to check it out.
I think this was 1946. So Japan was, I'm sure, struggling with recovery from the war period. And I think that in the past, taxes from the sale of sake were a big income source for the Japanese government. So I think that they were also looking for a way to rebound the sake industry. And as we know from this post-war period to about 1974, it was nothing but gangbusters growth for the sake industry. And 1974 is like the high point. So this is the beginning of that recovery, the post-war period. And they were nationally looking like, how can we make sake better? How can we revitalize the industry? So I'm sure that's the background for discovering this new yeast and distributing it very widely. And that's another thing I wanted to say about this, is that number 7 yeast is the most used yeast in the sake industry.
I remember seeing that once, and I was so surprised because when I think of common yeast in 2023, I always think of like number 9. That's like the thing that pops into my head, because everybody wants that kind of that little ginjo kick that it gives and things like that. But I did not realize that number 7 is still so big and such a big deal.
Yeah, it's widely distributed. It's super reliable. It's been around for so long. And it is the workhorse of the premium sake industry. So you're going to find it, a majority of breweries in Japan are using number 7.
Very cool. I like that.
So the number 7 yeast story is huge. And we were saying a moment ago how this was this rebirth of the sake industry and consumption's growing. The Japanese economy is recovering. It has this miracle recovery during this post-war period. And sake sales start to grow as well. And in 1982, Miyasaka Jozo responded by building a second facility to grow their production capacity. Their Suwa brewery is their original beautiful old brewery, and they needed more space. They needed more production capacity. So they found a site that is away from the Suwa brewery, and it's in Fujimi. But the unique thing about this is it is at an elevation of 1,000 meters. So it's up.
What?
It's up in the mountains. I think I've read it's the highest elevation sake brewery in the world. I think that's true. I'm not sure, but I've heard that.
Do we know why, or is this like an Everest thing, where it's because it was there? Like, I don't like. Why would you build your sake brewery 1,000 meters in the? That's a lot of meters, Tim.
Yes. Well, I do know the answer to this because I just read it. The answer is that the master brewer at the time lived there. Or he was born there or from there or something. So there was a connection to the master brewer, and that's how they found that plot of land. And I think the drive from one brewery to the other is half an hour or 45 minutes. It's like a relatively short drive, but it is very high up in the elevation, and it has all those considerations when you're brewing at a high elevation. But I think that's just a fun little factoid that they have one brewery at Lake Suwa and another one way up in the nearby mountains.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, for everybody at home, if you have ever tried to flex in some way at your place of work to get something done the way you want it to, bear in mind that we now have a bar that you have to meet, and it is having your place of work build an office 1,000 meters in the mountains because you're from there.
Have you ever been to Miyasaka Jozo?
No, I have not. It's something that we're trying to work out for the future, though. I have some friends that live in the area around Lake Suwa, and so it would be nice to see them, to see the brewery. The area looks really beautiful. There's a lot of onsens on the lakefront, so it definitely seems like a really relaxing place to visit. And also, it looks like there's a bunch of sake breweries, like kind of in a row, in that area. So that seems like a good reason to get over there.
Yeah, there are a number of breweries in the area, but Masumi is really the big kahuna in that region. And that has a lot to do with the current Miyasaka family that's running things. So the president is Naotaka Miyasaka, and his lovely wife Kumi is also working at the brewery. She runs Sella Masumi, which is like the most exquisite gift shop you will ever visit at a sake brewery.
Oh, really?
The goods that she has curated there are just amazing. Textiles, sake cups, glassware. It's just all so beautiful. And the son, Mr. and Mrs. Miyasaka's son, Katsuhiko, he's working at the brewery as well and has many years of experience working there and has input on the current lineup. And I also want to mention our buddy Keith Norum, who's a longtime ambassador for Masumi and travels the world. We have to have him on the show separately for sure.
Definitely. And
he is an advocate and ambassador for Masumi, and all of them are so welcoming and so nice. So if you get a chance to visit, definitely highly, highly recommended.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough back in 2020, I got to go to an event that Katsuhiko was doing in Tokyo, which was an English language event. And at this event, they talked a lot about the new direction that the brewery was going to be going into. So can we talk a little bit about that and focus on what's new for them? What's the new thing they're doing?
Yeah, that all started in 2019. And I think Katsuhiko wanted to suggest to the company to kind of redesign and reboot a little bit of the branding and return to the company roots of number 7. So before 2019, they were using a number of different yeasts. And I think what was suggested was that they produce all their sake only with their proprietary strain of number 7. So that's what they've done since 2019. And And the other thing is that they've redesigned all their labels, which is a beautiful new redesign. And they're all cohesive, different colors, but they have the same kind of brush stroke circle design. And you can visit sakerevolution.com to see our show notes and see some of the photos of the bottles and the labels. But they made it all cohesive, and they used this very abstract and beautiful kind of brush stroke circle to represent I assume, the mirror, and kind of bringing it all together and unifying it and getting back to their roots in a way, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's fun to see a brewery go through like a really big rebranding like this. I can imagine, though, it must have been really challenging for the Toji and for the other brewers to make this switch. You've been working with these other yeast for so long, and then you've got to try to replicate the sake you've been making, but switch up the yeast. It's got to be a big challenge for them.
Yeah. Well, maybe when we get Keith on the show someday, he can tell us what went down behind the scenes, but we can only speculate.
Yeah.
But I think it makes a lot of sense. Like if that's what your brewery is known for, that you're the birthplace of number 7 yeast, it really does make perfect sense that you would really hang your hat on that and make that the foundation of all your products. So it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Now, when I was at that event, Katsuhiko-san was expressing a little bit about why he wanted to do this. And he feels that a lot of the time sakes become lost in the shuffle, and they kind of taste a little similar. And he felt like the fact that number 7 was discovered in their brewery, it's something that really distinguishes them. And he wanted to focus on that. He wanted to say, this is what makes our brewery different from all of the other ones. We're going to use this yeast and we're going to focus on it. We're going to be the best at making number 7 yeast sake. And he feels like there's a little bit too much sameness going on. He wanted to be different. And I thought that was really interesting. What do you think?
I think it's really smart. You have to play to your strengths in branding. And I think that, when I asked you, what's the cliff notes? What are the highlights of this brand? Like you knew as a sake fan, you knew off the top of your head that number 7 was associated with them. Yeah. So I think it makes a lot of sense for them to really highlight that. And I'm sure it was a transition for them internally, but now that they're out the other end of it, it's something that kind of ties all their sakes together, and that makes for a really strong brand story.
Cool. Well, fortunately, we've got a bottle of one of their newly refreshed designs, and this is the Masumi Shiro Junmai Ginjo that we're going to be tasting today. This label is, let me tell you, this label is classy looking. It is very nice. It is very elegant. It is the logo, which Tim mentioned earlier, almost looks like a reflection. So we think it may be that mirror of truth, perhaps. It's white on white, but it's a little bit raised, so you can still see it. It's a different texture than the rest of the bottle. Again, very elegant looking, very nice. And then your writing is generally in like a light gray. So everything looks very subtle and purposeful. Like I said, it looks very premium to me. That's like the vibe that I get off of this bottle. What do you think?
Very beautiful, very elegant. Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. All right.
This sake is called Shiro, and what does that mean in English?
It means white, so they're leaning in with this label.
Yes, a white label, and the sake means white. And I looked on their website, and they had a little description. I don't know what this means exactly, but they said that Shiro is named for a soft white cloth made from tree bark that has the same light and buoyant character. So okay. I guess it's named after a fabric of some kind, but there wasn't any more information than that. And
interesting.
They also said that Shiro is their session sake. So let's look at why that might be the case. Do you want to give us the stats for Masumi Shiro?
Sure. I will preface, though, the English brand name is Sake Matinee. The rice variety being used here is actually, we got 2 of them. We've got Miyama Nishiki and Yamada Nishiki. The yeast, of course, is the Masumi proprietary number 7. It is brewed using the Sokujo method, so very modern. And that rice is polished down to 55% of its original size. And so this is a Junmai Ginjo. if I didn't mention it earlier. One thing that's interesting about this is it's relatively low alcohol. This is a 12% alcohol sake, so a little bit on the lower side.
Aha. Okay.
Yeah. The acidity is 1.5, and the sake meter value, that measure of your dryness and sweetness, is a -3.
All right. Well, that alcohol percentage is jumping out to me. So when they say this is their session sake or their sippable sake you can enjoy throughout the evening, that is what we're zeroing in on. So it's a lower alcohol sake. That's really key, I think, for this particular one. And as you mentioned, it has that number 7 proprietary yeast, which is their house yeast. Super historic.
I was actually going to ask you what a session sake was. I had never heard the term before, and I'm glad you went into that. That's great.
Doesn't that come from the beer world? Like a session beer is a beer
Maybe I don't drink a lot of beer.
Okay, well, we're educating all around, people.
Yes, this is great.
Yeah, so a session sake. All right.
Sake. So let's open it up and get it in the glass.
Yes. All right, we have our Masumi Shiro Junmai Ginjo poured.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give it a look-see. It looks very clear. I'm going to give it a smell.
Oh, yes, it is.
To me, it smells like peaches.
Yeah, peaches and like almost like a really mild honeydew. Like very subtle, like not beating you over the head with it. This is not the Ginjo-kan until you get a nosebleed sake. This is a very light one.
Yes. Well, just looking at the stats, knowing that it's 12% alcohol, that leads me to think it's going to be just a milder impression across the board.
Well, let's find out.
All right, let's give it a taste.
That's smooth. That was the first thing that popped into my head. I was like, "Ooh, this is." It made me think of browner beverages that you would think about the smoothness when you're taking them in. This is very smooth.
Yeah, it's overall for me, it's kind of soft in the texture, and it's not wimpy in any way. Like the acidity is 1.5, which is like right in the middle of our usual zone. So the acidity is there enough to give it some structure and just has a wonderful soft fruitiness that spreads across the palate when you sip on it. But overall, light, mild, easy drinking, and soft. That's what I would say in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think 100%. And you mentioned that this is their sake for exactly that situation, and I get it. Like this is easy drinking. This is something you can accidentally. Oh my goodness, where did the bottle go? That kind of thing.
Yeah, but overall, the flavors tend to lean just a touch on the sweet side and a touch on the fruity side. And
a touch.
There's a hint of acidity that comes through that kind of saves the day from it being too sweet. And then the finish just kind of is really soft and gentle and kind of just flutters away on you. Right?
Yeah, all right. I get what you're saying there. I like that. That's a good descriptor. Yeah, this one's a little bit challenging for me to describe when I taste it, to be completely honest, because it is really subtle. But there's a bit going on here, and it's a little bit different from your typical sake, right? I mean, there's it's very light and smooth, but there's a deceptive amount going on, I think. If you're paying attention, it really, like you point out, that sweetness is there and that acidity, and that they play really nicely together. I don't know. This is really nice.
Yeah, the import label says this sake is ideal for lunchtime sake sipping.
Lunchtime.
Hashtag day drinking.
No, they don't say hashtag day drinking, right?
I do.
Oh, okay.
I added that part. Yes.
Yeah.
But, we need more sakes for lunchtime sake sipping, I think.
Well,
This is a tragically underserved community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. And, with a lot of alcohol, you can go back to work and, maybe be productive. Yeah, that's nice.
I think
that's really good.
I think beer people listening, we're saying like 12% is like easy sipping lunchtime sake, light as a feather. I think that's a pretty hardcore
What the hell
beer.
are these people talking about?
Yes. Well, okay. So what are we having for lunch? I'm down with drinking this with lunch, but what are we going to order for lunch?
So I have to tell you, I have had this particular bottle with dinner, not with lunch, and I had it with sushi, with nigiri.
Ooh, I like that.
And it was perfect. It was absolutely flawless. It was a wonderful pairing. So that's going to be my way in. Is I think you should have this with sushi. Yeah,
I think it would definitely bring out any sweetness in like a soy sauce or something like that, and that could be nice. I would like to have this for lunch with like a Caesar salad. I think that would be really great.
You're leaning into that lunch thing.
Yes, I'm leaning into lunch. Hashtag day drinking. And I think a Caesar salad with chicken, maybe, that would be really great.
I think that would work really nicely, actually. Yeah.
That sounds really good.
I gotta start opening up my lunch sake pairing ideas now. Or my lunch sake pairing options.
Yeah, I'm going to have to start checking your thermos, whatever you bring to to work with you.
Sir.
It might be.
What are you implying?
It might be Masumi Shiro.
Could be.
Yeah. So what's our overall impression of Masumi Shiro and the brand story? Well, I'm going to go first. I know I asked the question, but I'm just going to jump right in. I think the brand story is really compelling. Like, there's so much history and some really historical stuff going on. And the thing that strikes me the most is that the current generation and the next generation are growing in a new direction and creating a new space for their brand and their sake to grow. So I think that's awesome.
I agree. I think that change is important. You need to change is growth, right? And if you don't grow, you don't change, you can stagnate. I really like what Katsuhiko's thoughts are on the future of the brewery. You know, he sees a way forward, and he knows what he wants to do, and he's acting on it. And I think that's really nice. I think that's cool. I think a lot of times people come into a situation like this and you don't want to mess with anything, right? And I think that in his mind, he's got a lot of things he wants to do, and he's getting started early. And he sees a future for the brewery that's like very focused and very direct, and he's going for it. He's got a vision. That's what I'm trying to say. He's got a vision.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. And it was so awesome and so lucky that you got to go to that event in English.
Yeah.
Like,
it was
how
great.
awesome is that?
Definitely a very unusual opportunity, but I'm really glad that we decided to go to it.
Yeah. Well, I think that Masumi is going to have a lot of great stuff coming up in the future. We really have to keep our eye on this brand, and I'm so happy we got to talk about them today.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, John, it was so great to taste with you. Thanks for #day drinking with me today. And love this Masumi Shiro Junmai Ginjo. Fabulous. I want to thank our listeners again so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you learned a little bit about Masumi and will give their brand a try. A special hello and thank you to our patrons. Thank you guys so much. Now, if you would like to support Sake Revolution and these shows are interesting to you, please visit our Patreon. That's at patreon.com/sakerevolution, where you can learn more about signing up and supporting the show.
And if you liked what we had to say today and you want to give us your thoughts, you can reach out to us and contact us at feedback@sakerevolution.com. We're always excited to hear from you. You can also reach out to Sake Revolution on Instagram and other social media outlets out there. We're not doing the TikTok thing yet, right, Tim?
No, not yet.
No. Okay. All right, so no TikTok, guys. No TikTok. Next time, maybe. Probably not. Okay. So please raise a glass. Remember to keep drinking sake and kanpai.